You have been trained to perform your interior life for strangers. Not because you chose it. Because the architecture of the modern age was built to extract it from you, one post. One confession, one exposed wound at a time. You scroll past men announcing their grief, their fear, their private failures. And somewhere beneath your silence, you feel the pressure to do the same. To match the exposure, to prove your humanity through your transparency. And you resisted, not because someone taught you to. Because something older than your education told you that a blade left in the open air does not stay sharp. That instinct has a name, it has a lineage. And it has been systematically dismantled by a culture that profits from your openness. This is not a conversation about suppression. The Stoic does not bury his fire, he contains it. There is a difference between a man who cannot feel and a man who has decided that what he feels is not public property. One is fractured marble, crumbling at the edges. The other is forged iron shaped by heat, cooled in silence, harder for having passed through both. The philosophers who built the foundations of Western thought understood something that has since been buried under centuries of sentiment. The interior life is a fortress, not a marketplace. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations in private. He did not publish his doubts. He did not perform his discipline for an audience. The meditations were never meant to be read. They were a sovereign speaking to himself. In shadow, building the iron architecture of his own mind. What you hold in your hands when you read that text is not a gift, it is a breach. A private forge accidentally left open. The warrior archetype across every serious civilization, Roman, Spartan, samurai, operated under the same principle. Silence was not weakness, silence was strategy. The man who reveals his interior state reveals his angles of attack. The man who masters opacity becomes, to those around him, something closer to stone than flesh. Immovable, unreadable, sovereign, Seneca wrote to Lucilius, guard yourself above all. Not your reputation, not your possessions, yourself. The self that is seen too clearly is the self that can be manipulated, diminished, redirected by the hands of others. This was not cynicism. This was architecture, the construction of a life that cannot be easily entered. Here is where the fracture appears in the modern argument. They tell you that vulnerability is strength, that openness builds connection. That the man who shares his shadow is the man who walks in light. And there is a grain of truth in it, which is exactly what makes it dangerous. Because the predator does not bare his teeth. The most formidable presence in any room is not the loudest, not the most confessional, not the most emotionally available. It is the one whose interior remains, to everyone present, a closed door. Not because there is nothing behind it. Because what is behind it has been forged in silence, in shadow. In the private fire of a discipline, no audience was permitted to witness. Kintsugi teaches that the broken places, filled with gold, become the strongest points in the marble. But notice what Kintsugi does not do. It does not display the fracture before the gold has been poured. It does not invite the world to watch the breaking. The gold is applied in private. The strength is revealed only after the work is complete. You have been asked to show the fracture before the gold arrives. To perform the breaking as though the breaking itself were the achievement. It is not, the breaking is the beginning, the silence that follows is the forge. And what emerges from that silence, that is what the next chapter is built upon. What you carry into part 2 is this: opacity is not armor worn over weakness. It is the natural condition of a mind that has learned to complete itself before presenting itself. The mirror is dark for a reason, not because there is nothing to reflect. Because the image is not yet finished. And a man who presents an unfinished image to the world does not invite admiration. He invites intervention. He invites the hands of others to complete what he could not complete himself. This is the first pillar. Incompletion made visible becomes an invitation for possession. Every system of power in history understood this. The Roman general did not reveal his troop positions before the battle. The architect does not display the foundation before the walls are raised. The blade does not announce its edge. What is known about you in advance becomes the map by which you are navigated, and a man who can be navigated can be controlled. Not through force, through familiarity. Through the quiet erosion of mystery that happens when you have shown too much, too soon, to too many. The modern architecture of social performance has made this erosion into a ritual. Post the doubt, share the fear, announce the wound. And watch as the world, which called itself supportive, begins to use the coordinates you handed it. Not maliciously always, sometimes with genuine warmth. But warmth is not the same as respect, and the man who is pitied is not the man who is followed. Incompletion made visible is not vulnerability, it is surrender. The second pillar is this: silence is not absence, it is pressure. A sealed room builds heat, a held blade holds its edge. A man who does not distribute his interior state across every available surface becomes, to those around him, a contained force, and contained forces are always more formidable than dispersed ones. The fire that is spread too thin becomes warmth. The fire that is contained becomes a forge. Seneca understood this not as cold philosophy, but as daily practice. Every morning he examined himself not for an audience, not for a record, but for the architecture of his own mind. The discipline was private, the result was public, not through confession but through action. Through the quality of his presence, through the weight of his silence in rooms where others filled every silence with noise. This is the distinction that the modern argument collapses. It conflates the result of inner work with the performance of inner work. It mistakes the gold for the pouring. The philosopher does not show you his forge. He shows you what the forge produced. You are not asked to be cold. You are asked to be complete before you are seen. Consider two men in the same room. A negotiation, careers in the balance, pressure distributed equally across both of them. The weak speaks first. Not because he has something to say, because the silence costs him more than the words. He fills it with qualification, with disclosure, with the subtle performance of relatability. He mentions his uncertainty, he frames it as honesty. The room receives it as information, and information in a negotiation is ammunition handed freely to the opposition. By the time he finishes speaking, the shape of his fear is visible to everyone present. The angles of attack have been drawn by his own hand. The sovereign does not fill the silence, he inhabits it. His face is stone, not because he feels nothing, but because what he feels has been processed in private, before this room. Before this moment. The forge has already done its work. What sits across the table is not a man in the middle of becoming. It is a man who has already arrived. The room cannot read him. And what cannot be read cannot be navigated. What cannot be navigated cannot be controlled. The negotiation ends. One man leaves with what he came for. The other leaves, having given more than he intended. The difference was not intelligence. It was not preparation. It was the management of the interior, the decision made long before that room about what was private and what was not. Ignore this and the cost is not dramatic. It does not arrive as catastrophe. It arrives as erosion. The man who performs his interior life for every available audience does not lose respect in a single moment. He loses it in increments. In the slight adjustment others make when they see him coming, the recalibration of how seriously to take him. In the way rooms shift when he speaks, not toward attention but toward management. He becomes someone to be handled, gently perhaps, with warmth even, but handled. The iron that is left in open air does not shatter, it rusts, slowly, quietly, until the structure that once held weight can no longer bear it. This is not a warning. A warning implies the outcome is still in question. This is a fact, drawn from every serious study of power across every civilization that built something worth studying. The men who shaped history did not do so by making themselves legible. They did so by becoming, to those around them, something closer to architecture than to flesh. Permanent, structured, entered only on their own terms. You do not have to choose silence because you have nothing to say. You choose it because you understand that what you say and what you withhold is the first and most fundamental act of sovereignty available to you. The forge is private, the gold is applied in shadow. And what emerges into the light is not a man in process, it is a man complete. That is the only version of yourself worth presenting. And part 3 will show you how that version is built, not in theory, but in the daily architecture of a life constructed without an audience. Not in theory, but in the daily architecture of a life constructed without an audience. This is where most men fail, not in the grand moments. Not under the pressure of a negotiation or a crisis or a confrontation. They fail in the ordinary hours, the morning before anyone is watching. The evening after the performance has ended. The private minutes when no mirror is present and no audience demands a shape from them. Because the forge does not operate on command, it operates on habit. The iron does not become a blade because someone decided once that it should. It becomes a blade through repeated contact with fire, repeated pressure, repeated cooling in silence. The decision is made once, the discipline is made daily. And the daily discipline, invisible, unwitnessed, unrewarded by any external recognition, is exactly what separates the sovereign from the weak. You do not build opacity in the room where it is needed. You build it in every room before that one. The disciplined man does not wake up and decide to be unreadable. He wakes up and does the work that makes him complete. The work is not dramatic. It is not a ritual designed for observation. It is the quiet accumulation of processed experience, the grief examined in private, the fear named in shadow, the fracture filled with gold before the light is allowed in. This is what the modern argument cannot sell you because it cannot be monetized. There is no product in private discipline. There is no engagement metric for the silence you keep at the dinner table when others are performing their wounds. There is no algorithm that rewards the man who processes his interior before he presents it. But there is a result, and the result is felt by everyone in the room even if no one can name its source. It is the quality of presence that does not ask for anything. The stillness that does not need to be explained. The weight of a man who has already done the work and shows you only what the work produced. That quality is not charisma. It is not confidence in the motivational sense, it is completion. And completion, in a world of men who are perpetually, publicly mid-process, is the rarest and most formidable thing you can bring into any room. Here is the framework, not suggestions, not principles to consider. Directives drawn from the same architecture that built every formidable mind this civilization has produced. Seal the forge before you speak in any room that carries weight. Audit what you are about to distribute. Ask not whether it is true, but whether it serves your architecture or dismantles it. The Stoic does not withhold because he is cold. He withholds because he understands that words spoken in heat, doubt voiced in negotiation, fracture displayed before the gold arrives, these are not honesty. They are surrender dressed in the language of authenticity. Every word you do not speak in the wrong moment is a stone added to the wall. The man who masters this audit becomes, over time, genuinely difficult to read, and what cannot be read cannot be used against him. Process in shadow, establish a practice of interior examination that has no audience. Not a journal posted online, not a conversation performed as therapy for the benefit of observers. A private reckoning, daily, brief, ruthless. The philosopher does not examine himself to produce content. He examines himself to produce clarity. Take the fire of the day's experience into a room where no one is watching. And do not leave that room until the iron has cooled. What you carry into the next day should be processed metal, not raw ore. The man who brings raw ore into his relationships, his work, his negotiations, pays for it in ways he will not immediately recognize, but the erosion is already underway. Command the silence, learn to inhabit silence the way stone inhabits space. Not as absence, as presence. When the room fills with noise, with confession, with the performance of relatability, do not compete. Do not fill the gap, let the silence stand and let it work. The warrior who speaks last in a room of anxious voices does not appear slow. He appears sovereign because he is. The silence is not empty, it is pressurized. It is the sealed room building heat. And the man who can sit inside that pressure, unbothered, unrushed, unreadable, while others dissolve into disclosure, that man has already won the room before a single word has been exchanged. Silence deployed with intention is the sharpest blade in the architecture of power. You are not broken. You were never broken. You are unfinished marble, and there is a difference that the modern world has spent considerable effort collapsing. Broken things are discarded, unfinished things are worked. The sculptor does not weep over the marble that has not yet taken its shape. He raises the chisel, he returns to the forge. He applies the gold in silence, in shadow. In the private discipline of a man who knows that the image is not yet complete, and who refuses to present it to the world before it is. The fractures are not your failure, they are your material. What you do with them, in private, without an audience, without applause. Without the validation of a world that profits from your exposure, that is your architecture. That is the only version of yourself worth presenting. And when that version finally enters the room, it will not need to announce itself. Stone does not explain itself, it simply holds the weight. Only those who refuse comfort will understand what comes next. Subscribe to Marble and Mind.